Hey, what is up, everybody? I just found out that presidential reconstruction was a failure and did not get the job done, that the goal was to bring African Americans closer to full citizenship, and the president just did not get that job done. It is now time for take two, Congressional Reconstruction. Here's an overview of Congressional Reconstruction. There's a group of people in Congress, those are lawmakers, called the Radical Republicans. Republicans are the political party, and radical means extreme. They were extreme Republicans in Congress, and they disagreed with anything and everything that President Andrew Johnson said and did. And they stated that more work needed to be done to bring African Americans closer to full citizenship. So Congress passed a series of bills that were designed to give equal rights to African Americans. President Johnson vetoed them all. And Congress was not happy with this, but they had enough votes to override those vetoes. This is Congressional Reconstruction. Here's the first bill. It's called the Civil Rights Act of 1866. And this law declared that freedmen would be full citizens with the same civil rights as whites. Now, civil rights mean just rights that you are guaranteed because you are a human. Well, white people in the United States had those civil rights, but those rights were denied to African Americans for so long. And so now the Civil Rights Act would declare that they would be full citizens. There was already a 13th Amendment we talked about in the previous section. The 13th Amendment ended slavery. Now we are on to another amendment called the 14th. It was ratified 3 years later, and this one guaranteed full citizenship to anyone born in the United States. And it guaranteed all citizens equal protection under the law. This means that even people who had been in slavery were considered to be born in the United States, and they would get the full citizenship rights just the same. The 14th Amendment says no state may abridge the privileges and immunities of any of its citizens or deny them due process of the law or equal protection of the law. So, the 14th Amendment gave citizenship rights. And these were the bills that Congress designed to help African Americans. They wanted to also extend the Freedmen's Bureau, which we talked about in the previous section as well. The Freedmen's Bureau was designed to help African Americans with the basic necessities of life that they did not have. And so these bills were designed to help African Americans. And what happens to them? Well, extending the Freedmen's Bureau was vetoed by President Johnson. He said, nope, that is not going to be a law in this country. The Civil Rights Act of 1866, vetoed again. And the 14th Amendment, which he didn't even have the power to veto, he still opposed it. Well, luckily for Congress, you can override a veto. And so Congress's reaction was to override the extending the Freedmen's Bureau, and they still got it passed. They had enough votes. The Civil Rights Act of 1866, did they have enough votes? They did also, another veto override. And the 14th Amendment, even though the president opposed it, they still were able to pass it. What we're seeing here is the president on one side, Congress on the other side, and they are just butting heads in disagreement. Well, there was another law that was passed called the Military Reconstruction Act. And we know that the government was a disaster at this time, that the government had been destroyed by the war. Well, those southern governments were going to now be welcomed back into the United States, but they were not following the laws. They were passing things like the Black Codes, and they were not making sure that African Americans had equal rights. So the South got divided up into 5 military districts, and each of them would be governed by a U.S. Army general. And this way, the military would make sure that the laws were being protected, or they were being followed, and that African American rights were being protected. That is the goal of the Military Reconstruction Act. It also allowed those new governments to be created with blacks and whites in office. You can see this photo here, or that's a painting, I should say. This painting here is showing you a group of African American lawmakers that were elected to Congress, senators and representatives, during the Military Reconstruction Act and Reconstruction. Well, Southerners who had supported the Confederacy were denied the right to vote with the Military Reconstruction Act. So it helps the governments of the South make sure they follow the laws to protect rights, but also it took away the voting rights. Would that make Southerners feel like this? Or more like this? Yeah, I think it would probably be more like this right here, that Southerners who had supported the Confederacy losing their rights is going to make them angry. Now let's go back to that conflict between Congress and the president. President Johnson gets impeached. He's the first president to be impeached. And what this means is not that we throw a peach at the guy. No, of course not. It means that formal charges were brought against him. That means Congress says to the president, you have acted in an unfair way. We don't like what you've done, and we're charging you with this. Well, what they said is that he brought the high office of the President of the United States into contempt, ridicule, and disgrace, to the scandal of all good citizens. And so they vote, and they do indeed impeach him. Now, we haven't had too many presidents throughout history who get impeached. We've had about a total of 4 impeachments to 3 different presidents. And we have had one other president who was going to be impeached, but instead of going through all of that, he decided to resign the presidency. Johnson's the first one to have this shame brought upon him. Well, once a president is impeached, the next thing is for them to be voted on whether they would be removed from office. So Congress and the senators, they vote to remove him, and he is saved by just 1 vote. They were 1 vote shy of removing him from the 2/3 needed in the Senate. He did lose some political power, but President Johnson survives that removal and continues on. And we've got one more topic during Congressional Reconstruction. It's called sharecropping. Now, the system of sharecropping is a system of farming, and basically it's dividing land up into small plots that could be rented to farmers to farm on. If you think about it, one of the problems in the South was that those farmers needed, or those landowners needed farmers to farm their land, and all these people who had been freed from slavery needed jobs. And so they kind of looked at this as this could help both. Bring farmers in to farm the land, and also give jobs to people who needed jobs. So here's how the system of sharecropping worked. The land you could see here, let's imagine this is one large farm, and the land is divided up into these smaller sections. And a farmer can come along and pay some rent to use that piece of land. And they can farm the crops on that land, and they make money by selling those crops. In this way, sharecroppers had to borrow money. In this way, sharecroppers had some land that they could farm and they could make some money. But they didn't have money in the first place to rent the land. They also needed some other materials. They needed seeds, food, tools, supplies. And so what happens here is instead of just paying the rent, at the end of the year, once they sell all of their harvest, all of their crops, then that money can be used to then pay the rent. Now, sometimes a a landowner would allow them to pay the rent with 1/3 of the crop. 1/3 of the crop. That means at the end of the year, the farmer gets to keep 2/3 of what they made, and they pay the other third in rent. Well, what ends up happening is at the end of the year, when they go to sell off their crops, they rarely earned enough money to pay back their debt. And that means that they owed money to the landowner at the end of the year that they didn't have. And the landowner would then force them to stay on the land and farm it again the following year to make up that money. At the end of the year, they don't have enough money to pay back, and they have to run it back again and farm that same land again. The system of sharecropping turned into a system that sounds a lot like slavery, that it attached people to the land. It didn't allow them to leave until they paid off their debt, and they could never pay off their debt in this system. The system of sharecropping is almost slavery by another name. So to display this, here's 3 photographs, and let's try to decide, is that a photo of sharecropping or enslaved people? There's A, B, or C. Which one of those do you think might be sharecroppers, and which one do you think might be enslaved people? It's a trick question. They are all photos of sharecropping in 1910, 1907, and 1898. These are all images of sharecropping, and it looks a lot like the images I've seen of slavery, with one exception. There were white farmers who also became sharecroppers and got stuck in the same system of poverty that this sharecropping was designed for. So in a way, it seemed like sharecropping would be a good system that would help these farmers make some money. Instead, it returns them to a system that is very much like slavery. So we just went through Congressional Reconstruction, and Congressional Reconstruction doesn't get the job done either. That one is going to end, and we're going to move on to another phase of Reconstruction. It's called Southern Reconstruction. And here we go into the next phase. Peace.